If there is a God, how can we know Him? How can we understand anything about Him? Well, C.S. Lewis wrestled with this question. As you know, C.S. Lewis was an agnostic who became a Christian through his own study and became one of the greatest apologists of the Christian faith. And he characterized the question this way. He envisioned himself to be somewhat like Sherlock Holmes. If there is a God, I can't possibly know the God who created all of this any more than Sherlock Holmes can know Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the guy who wrote the stories. Well, that is a deep question, and it is a very difficult one. A lot of people have wrestled with that question and have remained agnostics for their entire life. Well, the answer to the question came to Mr. Lewis, and his answer was, that's true. I cannot know God any more than Sherlock Holmes can know Conan Doyle. But if Conan Doyle wrote himself into the story as a character, then Sherlock Holmes could know Conan Doyle. And in the same way, if God writes Himself into the story of humanity, if God reveals Himself to us, then we can know Him. So the question is, has God revealed Himself to us? Well, Paul writes to the Roman church in Romans chapter 1, starting in verse 20. For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes have been clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. You see, Paul told the Romans that because God made this world, God displayed Himself within the creation. As people walk, and as all human beings walk around creation, we can know that God exists. And perhaps we can know some things about His nature. For instance, a flower like this. How can one possibly look at a flower like this and notice its complexity, particularly with modern science that we have today, knowing that this flower is made up of thousands of individual plant cells, and those individual plant cells are actually controlled by DNA. DNA that has a three-dimensional language in it, something that we can't even envision as humans, a three-dimensional language. Our language is always two-dimensional, and we can only describe it in one way, linear. But DNA is a three-dimensional language. Now, knowing those facts, we can ascertain that there is, in fact, a God. That concept of knowing that there is a God by observing creation is known as general revelation. God has revealed Himself in a general sense through all of the creation. People who study flowers and plants, sometimes they think that they just evolved. Paul goes on to say in Romans chapter 1 that those people suppress the knowledge of the truth because of their sin, because they want to have no accountability to God for the things that they do. When the truth is, God's very nature is shown in this flower, in this creation. But the question is that enough? Is it enough to be able to look at creation? Is it enough to be able to look at this flower and know that there's a God that created it? Will that be enough to save you when it comes time to be judged by that God? Well, the answer to that question is no. You see, because we are sinful, we need something else. We need a specific understanding of God. We need an understanding of God that includes an understanding of how God operates and how He saved us from our sin. In order to have that kind of understanding, we have to have what's known as special revelation. See, Jesus spoke of special revelation when speaking to the Pharisees in John, or rather speaking to his disciples in John chapter 8, starting in verse 31. Then Jesus said to those who believed him, "If you abide in me, in my word, you are my disciples indeed, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." See, the truth that sets you free is the gospel of Jesus Christ. Without that, you cannot be really free, even though you may think you're free. And all people are not free. Jesus goes on and talks about in another part of John how some people have heard his voice, but not all have listened. You see, some people hear the gospel and reject it for the same reason that they reject the natural creation. One cannot prove the existence of God by videotaping him or anything like that, but you can certainly see the evidence that God exists. And through special revelation, we can understand the gospel. We can understand that the same God who created all of this universe, who created this flower, who created me, loved me enough to send his Son to die. Jesus himself said, "I have come to show the Father." The word there for show is the Greek word exadzo, which means to bring out, exegete. We get our word exegete from this word. That being the case, Jesus was here, just like Conan Doyle in the story that we discussed earlier. Jesus was here as a character in the story to tell us about the God who created us. And without that special revelation, the general revelation doesn't count. So this week, while you're discussing this amongst yourselves in the discussion groups, and while you're reading your reading, please keep in mind that the fact that you know the gospel is a special revelation of God. Not something new, but it's a special revelation to us, to those of us who are Christians, who are called and elected.